Great. Well, since we only have an hour, I think we're going to go ahead and start as others will join us. My name is Wendy Gruhl. I'm the former city controller for Los Angeles, and I have had the pleasure of, this is my second year of participating in the Blue-Green webinar series as a moderator. And we are happy to be part of this. I want to thank our sponsors, of course, which is Alta-Sea, Cal State Northridge Sustainability Institute for Sustainability, and of course the LA Coalition for Economy and Jobs for sponsoring all of this. This is the fourth in a series that has been this June, and the goal of this project really is to spotlight on emerging aquaculture sector in our economy, and Randy may make sure I'm pronouncing that correctly when you speak. So it is the aquaculture and the supporting technologies that bring a lot of key technologies together. Future growth opportunities that support our coastal ecosystems, the economy, jobs, and our communities. This webinar is really trying to look at reimagining the partnerships between business and government, universities and communities through regenerative ocean research, exploration, and equity-based economic development. And as we look at, as we were chatting amongst ourselves a little bit earlier, as we are climate change and heat and all of the drought, all those things we have in California, these are important issues for us to be able to address, and particularly something that unbeknownst to me until I did a little research as preparing for this, really been on a lot of people's agenda and their strategies for a long period of time. I want to just walk through how this is going to occur. We're going to introduce just briefly our three panelists. We are going to ask them to each introduce themselves a little bit greater than what I did in their current positions and what they do, and then have 20 minutes of some dialogue, some questions that we're going to ask, and then ultimately be able to get questions for those of you that have joined us for this webinar as well. And I think that it will be coming through the chat so that you can make sure your question gets to be asked and answered. So I'm going to start with our first panelist and introduce him. Randy Lovell, who's the State Aquaculture Coordinator at the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. He was appointed to this position, which I did not know existed before, in August of 2012, and has spent nearly 30 years in this industry as a designer and builder and operator of various aquaculture facilities, and has really worked with, I'll let you share with the kinds of people you've worked with in designing and developing this kind of opportunities, and particularly how this was established in the state of California. That I'm very interested as well. David Telling is a founding partner of Pacifico. He has specialized in the creative direction and production of marketing and educational materials in all forms of media, and really in branding and messaging and marketing companies, both large and small. And he began his career in education. And I noticed when I saw that you represented Great Britain at the International Olympic Academy in Athens, Olympia, and has been was a presenter at Cal State University Long Beach on the pre-modern Olympic Games. And as I was telling them, in someone else's office at the LA 84 offices, it's very appropriate there with the Olympics. There's actually several Olympic things here around me. And then thirdly, I want to introduce Diane Windham, who is the Regional Aquaculture Coordinator of the California Noaa Fisheries West Coast Region. That's a mouthful there, Diane. And she is the coordinator for California. You've served in this role for 15 years. You're really the liaison between the Office of Aquaculture at NOAA headquarters and the offices in California, located here in Long Beach, and you work really closely with local governments and the whole industry that is there. So I hope that you will also share with us how long this has been, a priority in Noaa there. So with that, I wanted to be brief, because really the best part of this is having interaction and opportunities to discuss this particular sector. And so I'm going to go kind of backwards. Diane, I'm going to go to you first and ask that you do, a little bit of an introduction of yourself, greater than what I did just a moment ago, but more importantly, the role that you play.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for the introduction, and thanks for inviting me to participate in this panel along with my esteemed colleagues. I'm really happy to be here. As Wendy said, I've been serving in the role as the Noaa Fisheries Aquaculture Coordinator for the West Coast region in California for about 15 years, but I have over 37 years of time with the federal government. Most of that working for Noaa, except for a 7-year stint that I did with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So I've been working on endangered species issues more generally for most of my career. I'm a marine biologist by training, and I wanted to change. I wanted to get back into the marine resources more deeply, and was really intrigued by the aquaculture opportunity that we have in front of us. And to answer your quick question about how long has aquaculture been a priority for Noaa, really since about 1980 with the passage of the National Aquaculture Act. And so Noaa as an organization has a long history supporting aquaculture development, both for economic reasons as well as safe and sustainable seafood supply. But complementary to our marine resource protection and authorities under the Endangered Species Act and Magnuson-Stevens Act and Marine Mammal Protection Act. And as you stated, I work as a liaison between industry and the federal and state regulatory agencies that do the permitting and evaluating of aquaculture projects, as well as interacting with the research and applied science communities to help prioritize research efforts to better inform aquaculture practices and identify some of the data gaps that we have. So I'll leave it at that. I don't want to dominate, but again, happy to be here.
Thank you so much. And Randy, I'm going to go to you for you to give a little bit more about what you do and the position and how it really got started for you.
Thanks, Wendy, and thank you for having me. It's an honor. As far as my background, first half of my career spent designing and building fish farms and production facilities. Second half in the primarily sales and marketing, providing instrumentation and other life support systems to aquaculturists and the groundwater industry. This third half started 10 years ago working with the government, and this appointed position was created in the mid-'80s. I'm the third person to hold this position, and it's a job that involves making sure growers know how to be compliant with the regulations, making sure that decision makers know when being compliant with those rules is overly onerous, and doing a lot of educating in the meantime. So I work with growers, regulators, decision makers, and the general public to enhance their regulatory understanding of and the development opportunities for sustainable aquaculture in California.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Randy. And David, tell us a little bit about how you got into this marketplace with all of your experience and a niche of understanding this world.
Well, my direct involvement is based on the fact that we set up Pacific Six, a partnership about 5 years ago. Pacific Six is the brainchild of our capital partner, John Molina, who had a fairly illustrious career in healthcare with Molina Healthcare that they developed over 20 years and became a Fortune 200 plus company with many employees and investors. Became a public company. And Pacific Six is pretty much John Molina's vision after Molina Healthcare. So we're involved in, we're an investment and development company, and we're involved in numerous and fairly diverse initiatives we believe will have a positive impact on people in their communities. We're Long Beach based, and so historical renovation of landmark buildings, for example, is one of those. Green energy and environmental initiatives, healthcare, and then of course aquaculture. The aquaculture came from the background of John being on the board of directors of the Aquarium of the Pacific for 12 years, 3 of those being chairman. And of course, he met up with people who are very involved in the importance of sustainable seafood for the future, including Jerry Schubel, the president, and others. And that was the inspiration of John to want to be involved in aquaculture, and was one of the primary objectives of Pacific Six when we started up 5 years ago. So essentially, we want to demonstrate, how we can grow more of the seafood we consume, while incorporating the best of practices and obviously showing a diligent concern for the environment. So we have a number of investments. Pacific Mariculture, which is the first mussel farm in federal waters, which we took over from Catalina Sea Ranch, when I think it's fairly common knowledge that they weren't doing the best job of providing what was necessary from a permitting process. And then also we got involved in Pacific Ocean Aqua Farms, working with Hub Seaworld Research Institute, who had been working with Cuna del Mar, a Walton funded company, and we took over from them. So we're looking to develop Pacific Ocean Aqua Farms as a model for sustainable offshore finfish farming. And then two other investments: Pacific Hybrid, it's a proprietary shellfish breeding program for more productive and resilient shellfish. And then also Symbrosia, who are looking to change climate change one burp at a time, because they're using a red seaweed and developing a red seaweed that, when added to livestock feed, can reduce bovine burps by up to 90%, which, believe it or not, is due to 6% of global warming is due to bovine burps. So, we're involved in a number of different levels on aquaculture. Our two primary ones in open ocean, of course, Pacific Mariculture for the mussel farming, and the Pacific Ocean Aqua Farms for the yellowtail finfish farming, which is still in the complete permitting phase. So I hope that wasn't taking too long.
No, but you're going to have to explain a little bit longer when I come back to you on the bovine burps and what that means. A lay person in that way. So thank you. And I did forget in the beginning that actually the title of our session today is See Through the Weeds, Navigating the Policies and Politics of Offshore Seaweed Farming in California. And so that is what we're chatting about, as well as all the other kinds of things that you've outlined. Randy, I'm going to go to you first. So it sounds like in the 80s, when this was established, it was more regulatory and has really grown, still there, but about, now moved into really being visionary about what should be happening and being ahead of the curve. So could you maybe share with me a little bit about what, if California has a guiding vision for aquaculture, and I'm going to still continue to challenge with that word, how to say it with the right way, but and the relationship you have there, and so maybe just tell a little bit about what the vision is that you think California has for the sector.
So the state's involvement in aquaculture goes back to early statehood. The first law having anything to do with fish or wildlife management was actually a law that governed oysters that were planted in San Francisco Bay, and this was passed in 1850. This is before we had a bag limit, a hunting season, a fishing season, any of that sort of thing. This was all about oysters and those who cultivated or at least held them until they were being sold. But fast forwarding, the department sort of cultivated, if you will, an expertise in various finfish culture techniques, was actually a leader in aquaculture. And around that combination of primarily trout and some salmon culture, because of dams, because of needs for fishing, became expert in that and sort of preeminent as a skill set, as a brain trust for aquaculture. And that kind of explains why, even though by the time the mid-'80s came around, the legislature defined and recognized aquaculture as agriculture, primary oversight in most regulatory aspects of aquaculture happens within the Department of Fish and Wildlife and its related Fish and Game Commission. In those mid-'80s, the legislature specifically they have two policies expressed in statute. One is in Public Resources Code. It declares that the practice of aquaculture is in the interest of the people of the state for a variety of beneficial reasons. And also in the Fish and Game Code, it declares that the policy of the state to encourage conservation, maintenance, utilization of living resources of the ocean and other waters under its jurisdiction and influence for the benefit of all citizens. That's quite a mouthful, but one of the objectives of that policy is to encourage the development of commercial aquaculture. So two specifically articulated policies in code: one, that the practice of aquaculture is in the interest of the people; the other, that the development of commercial aquaculture is something that should be prioritized. More recently, though, the Ocean Protection Council, in collaboration with 9 state public agencies, has articulated guiding principles for sustainable marine aquaculture in California. And they are currently supporting the development of an action plan to further provide policy guidance and vision for sustainable marine aquaculture's future in California. That action plan is under development now, and we expect a draft version in the coming year in 2023, and expect full public discussion and engagement to help refine that public draft and become something final.
So Randy, I have a question, kind of general. So does anyone not like aquaculture? I mean, is it controversial in that way? As to, again, I know as we look at a variety of issues and you're talking about water and you're talking about wildlife and all those things, is it a controversial kind of place, and what would that be in your state plan?
It can be controversial, and really the proof is, or the difference is in the details. Aquaculture, we have to recognize, is in California is really diverse. It's practiced in virtually every habitat we have. We're talking about mountains, desert, valley, cities, coast. I know we're here to talk about marine aquaculture and more specifically seaweed aquaculture, but when we speak about state policy toward it, it covers a lot of ground. And so the other wild card in there is, if we're going to talk about coastal or marine aquaculture, we're necessarily talking about a public space. It's not private property. So developing on private property in the inland freshwater realm is an entirely different set of challenges from those challenges we have in a public space where, California has a huge variety of stakeholders and interests in what goes on in the ocean. So we have a lot to consider before it's considered non-controversial.
Yeah. I don't know if there's anything that's non-controversial in today's world.
Right.
But I could just see some of the things that people might and different. So sorry, I'm going to go a little deeper on that. On the private versus public, you regulate both, right? But it is something in your plan and your vision for those that are the public spaces is just a little bit different. Okay.
That's right. We kind of have a pretty good blueprint for how we handle aquaculture on private property. It's a little bit more of a moving target. There's a lot of innovation going on. There's a lot of new ideas out there. Bovine burps is creating a driving force toward a different type of aquaculture development. And quite frankly, we don't have all of the proper framework in place to give clear direction. So we really do need to have that public discussion.
All right, well, we're coming back to, I'm not coming to you next, David, but right after that, we're coming to you, the bovine burps, to explain that to me and other people who might be listening. Diane, so you represent the federal government, and, with the with the state and the federal, what kind of vision do you have for California, relationship you have with California?
Well, we strive to have a really good, transparent working relationship with state government. While we are the federal government, our statutory authorities cover state waters as well. We have responsibilities under the Endangered Species Act, Magnuson-Stevens Act, which in part addresses essential fish habitat. We also have authorities under the Marine Mammal Protection Act, the National Marine Sanctuary Act, Coastal Zone Management Act, the National Environmental Policy Act, and the Fish and Wildlife Coordination Act. As I mentioned before, aquaculture has been a national priority for the Noaa organization since 1980. And the inception of the Aquaculture Act created an interagency working group on aquaculture under the National Science and Technology Council and the Executive Office of the President, which is now referred to as the Subcommittee on Aquaculture. So we coordinate with that group as well as with other federal agencies on aquaculture priorities and activities, including with EPA, the Corps of Engineers, USDA for plant and animal health inspection, FDA for veterinary medicine and applied nutrition and food safety, and again, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. But all of these things cross over into state waters as well. So we are in a unique position in that Noaa has a high degree of specialized expertise amongst our many agencies that are nested under the umbrella of Noaa. We have the National Marine Fisheries Service, where I'm housed. We work with the National Ocean Service, those are the big white ships, and a lot of the oceanographic research, as well as we have science centers that also work on that. One of our primary partners within the Noaa organization is the National Coastal Centers for Ocean Science. They again have very specialized expertise for aquaculture. We try and avail our specialized expertise on what is really seen as a developing industry with offshore aquaculture. We try and bring that expertise to our state and federal regulatory partners because many of those entities are lacking that kind of expertise, that it's new and different for them. And so we try and provide some of that specialized expertise, whether it's spatial planning analyses or marine engineering analyses. We're finding that the permitting agencies don't necessarily have that kind of expertise. And all of the state and federal agencies are really working in very challenging times budget-wise and human resource-wise. We're all short-staffed and the workload exceeds our ability to address that workload. So we try, and Noaa doesn't have permitting authority for aquaculture in federal waters, but we again try and bring the specialized expertise and the leadership that we can to inform the development of a sustainable industry in both state and federal waters. So we of course are going to defer to the state in terms of bottom leases and so forth that are under the purview of the State Fish and Game Commission. But in federal waters, again, the consistent agencies are, all of the permits come from the Army Corps of Engineers under Section 10 of the Rivers and Harbors Act, which governs structures in the water. And so we try and bring that expertise to support their process because any applicant who's pursuing a project in state or federal waters is going to require a Corps of Engineers permit. And relative to Finfish, which is limited to federal waters at this time, the Environmental Protection Agency also has a permitting role relative to discharge into waters of the United States through a national pollution discharge elimination system. We work with EPA to develop modeling efforts to inform water quality implications with aquaculture, depositional modeling related to aquaculture, and we also work with FDA and our own Noaa seafood inspection program relative to national shellfish sanitation compliance issues. So that's kind of a synopsis. We try and provide leadership where we can, resources and expertise, and cross the boundaries between state and federal agencies. We try and share our expertise to the greatest degree possible.
Great, thank you, Diane. And I'm sure there's a lot of acronyms in there for all of us to listen in. And it's actually a great segue. And I'm sorry earlier, David, I didn't say Pacific 6. This is how bad my eyes are. I thought it said Pacific 6. I want to make sure I'm clear with that, Pacific 6. But after she just described the process, and Army Corps of Engineers, which has its own, I guess, bureaucracy in that. But how could you maybe give us some insight on how you were able to, Pacific 6 was, in receiving permitting for some of the offshore farming that you've done. And then I do want you to explain the burping thing.
Yeah. So, excuse me, that's my phone. I'll just turn that off. It's my son trying to contact me from Switzerland right now. So actually, for us, in terms of how we entered into, permitting, it's slightly separate for mariculture and for Pacific Ocean aquafarms, because the avenues kind of opened themselves up for us. So we became linked with the Finfish permitting, like I say, based on the fact that when we were starting to explore our options, we linked up with Don Kent from Hub Seaweed Research Institute, and that's where we learned about where there was an original permit being applied for through Cuna del Mar, and when Cuna del Mar backed away from that, we kind of took over the process and took over the flag to be able to do that. And so from the mariculture side, we were taken over from Catalina Sea Ranch, who already had a permit. So what our role in that is our capital partner, John, was already invested in Catalina Sea Ranch, saw some of the limitations of where that was going, and we really felt kind of an obligation as well to be able to do that right. That is one thing we'd say. He's trying again. Excuse me. So our motto is do it here, do it right, do it now. And so with Cuna del Mar, what we're going through the process at the moment is we brought over a specialist team from New Zealand, led by Nick Hajek, our head of operations. And we're trying now to work with the regulators to kind of correct and bring into full compliance that farm that is already out there. It's 100 acres already out there in the San Pedro Shelf. And so as soon as we brought over expertise from New Zealand, because we kind of consider that at the moment for mussel farming, the gold standard in terms of environmental friendliness, process best practices, etc. And so, one of the things I'm going to recommend to people, in future, always bring expertise aboard, and especially when it's, involved in farming, and the importance of doing things right, laying out a farm in the correct way. So we actually put $2 million into doing what was necessary to kind of reformat, re-clean up the existing Catalina Sea Ranch site. And we were told earlier on we'd also need to invest in more capability to be able to do things the right way, a la best practices. So we invested in a purpose-built vessel, a 90-foot vessel, to be able to do that, so we could actually do things the right way and be able to do safe, scalable aquaculture from the mussel standpoint. We're looking to have delivery of that vessel in the next 2 months. And from that point onwards, we'll be working with regulators to prove that we can set up the farm exactly as it needs to be able to monitor it and do all the testing that's necessary to make sure that it's working and operational in the right way. We're working with the regulators right now to actually talk about best practices and way to do that, from converting, for example, the 100 acres from what was originally set up in a square format to more of a rectangular format, because it's inherently safer and a better way to farm. So with Catalina Sea Ranch, now Pacific Mariculture, in fact, we'll separate that out entirely, we're heading down the path now of taking that next step and bringing online a fully compliant farm. With Pacific Mariculture, we're going through the process, and I have the lovely opportunity to work with Diane on that, working with multiple agencies. We had to go through a full NEPA review for that, and in full EIS, environmental impact study. We have, it's mandated that we provide a consultant to work with Noaa along those lines, because it's very intricate. We've had a very in-depth survey of locations, and this is prior to AOAs. And the survey was done pretty much from north of Mexico up the way to Ventura. And out of all those locations, to find a farm that would fit suitable for farming, and then also not have or potentially not have environmental impact or social impact. I think it was only 11 locations, small kind of locations that became options. And we had to choose two options and go through the full EIS. Tell me if I'm saying this wrong, Diane, but go through a full EIS for both locations, even though we'll be working with one. And that also involves getting parity of data between the two. And that's where DUDEC comes on in to work with us and our experts at Hubs to put together an environmental impact study, which is very complex, very deep, very broad, from everything, obviously, from engineering of the farm, the actual dynamics of the water that you're putting it in, health programs for the fish, breeding programs for the fish. It's very broad and very deep. That's why you need expertise to help you to make sure you do it.
It's not for the faint of heart. Someone that you have no idea what they were doing to just step into it, and that expertise that is needed, which is really important. And as I said, as a recovering elected official, I know those EISs, EIRs, seek all those things that happen, that there's a reason for them, but sometimes they become overwhelming. And need to be looked back at. So I would ask, I'm going to go back to Diane and Randy and ask the two of you, as we look at the kind of short and long-term prospects for offshore seaweed farming, and again, how is it possible? Is it, how much of it is being done today? Do you see it as a growth, industry? Are there places where it is more likely to occur? Just kind of some kind of ideas, and I'll let either Randy or Diane go first. So they're both going. Okay, Diane.
All right. Well, yeah,
You're
unmuted, so I guess so feel free to speak up, Randy, if I misspeak. So yeah, I see. Even though in practice, seaweed aquaculture has been underway, especially in a sort of a research and development mode for quite a long while, but the commercial potential for seaweed aquaculture is growing greatly, and there's an extremely high interest in seaweed aquaculture. Not only for commercial purposes for human consumption, culinary products and so forth, cosmetics, but also there is a great deal of growing interest in kelp production for ameliorating the effects of ocean acidification in our oceans, for potential use as biofuel to offset some of our fuel challenges in the United States, and even for carbon sequestration, actually farming large areas of kelp, again, for that, to address some of the ocean health conditions and offsetting the effects of ocean acidification, and using carbon sequestration as a way for others to offset their effects on the carbon footprint. We're talking large amounts of kelp that would be needed for carbon sequestration or for biofuel, but there is a lot of interest, a lot of grant programs that are focusing on that. So there's a lot of research and development underway to explore the potential for that, and a few companies that are actually pursuing permits. We have one project in particular, but there are others in the works, in the queue, so to speak, that are going to be testing some of their hypotheses with kelp growing in terms of methods for growing the kelp and so forth for biofuel. And it's funded by the Department of Energy through what's called the ARPA-E program, which is supporting a grant program that's supporting research into kelp biofuel. So there's a lot of potential. I think the only limiting factor is just the amounts of kelp that would be needed to support a biofuel supply or for carbon sequestration purposes. But the way it's being pursued is mindful in terms of the research and development aspects first to perfect the methodologies for growing and all of the components that enter into that. They're similar to any form of aquaculture where you site a farm is critically important, and conducting that spatial analysis to site an operation where there's the least amount of conflict, and that conflict can be in the form of other users in that ocean space, as well as biological considerations. So critical habitat for endangered species, migratory whale pathways, feeding grounds for different marine mammals, navigation and shipping traffic, huge issue in Southern California, and military. And we work very closely with the Department of Defense to get Pentagon clearance on areas to ensure that a site is free of conflict with the military. That plays very heavily into siting aquaculture. And so again, that's an area of expertise that we've been able to provide to support the regulatory process, which in turn helps the applicants as well. So I think it's really exciting. I think that it's a form of aquaculture that public perception wise is perhaps viewed more favorably than some of the public perceptions that might still exist today about other forms of aquaculture. I will say that outreach and education is a really important part of the work that Noaa tries to do, because there are a lot of misperceptions about what the aquaculture industry looks like today. And it's a different industry than it was 20 years ago, even 10 years ago. The industry has really strived to improve their practices and be environmentally friendly and sustainable. And the economic potential of that is really impressive. Just a fun fact, the United States imports probably at least 70 or more % of their seafood. And a good 50% of those imports come from aquaculture in other parts of the world that may not have the same environmental protections that we have in the United States. So we actually have an opportunity to shape a developing industry in the United States that is the best that it can be, just like David was describing, using the best management practices and monitoring techniques and compliance with permit conditions and so forth. We have the ability to do that here in the United States and in California, which is extremely sensitive to those sorts of environmental concerns. And yet the economic benefits are huge. This aquaculture industry can really reinvigorate our working waterfront and coastal communities and help our existing ports and harbors to have greater revenues. And it means job creation. And more importantly, it means a sustainable and domestic seafood supply that we know where it was grown, we know how it was grown, we know what practices were implemented. We can have confidence as a consumer in knowing that that product is safe. So it's a really exciting time for aquaculture, and I'm super excited about the interest in seaweed aquaculture in particular. And seaweed can be grown along with shellfish in the offshore environment. So there's I think a lot of opportunity. The siting component is the most critical. That's the start point. You've got to understand that piece of real estate to make sure that you're trying to avoid conflict with all those other considerations.
Absolutely. And so, Randy, she gave some of the, vision, and again, you all work closely together, but anything that you would want to add or say that's specific to California and where you're seeing the focus and attention to that?
I think Diane did a great job of painting the landscape. One of the things that I think it's important for the audience to hear, if we look at aquaculture on land, it's practiced at large commercial scales. It's practiced by hobbyists and everything in between. The ability to bootstrap an operation like we all did 30 years ago, still can be done on land, but there's no way that's happening out in the ocean. We really need to be realistic about the financial resources it takes to navigate permits, to successfully cultivate something like seaweed or any other marine species for that matter in the public ocean space, right? And I think the thing to think about, and for people to think about, is how that translates into who ultimately will have access to the opportunity of cultivating seaweed or shellfish. I think it's really important to also recognize that, we want sustainable businesses both environmentally and economically, because if an operation is short-term, not able to deliver, that they need a viable business model. They need to be soundly managed. They need to be soundly designed. And if that doesn't happen, if they fail quickly, they drain resources of investment capital, they drain the resources of agency oversight and management, and it could possibly jeopardize other operations that might hope to follow and might face negative experiences and lessen confidence in aquaculture. So I think we have some real interesting opportunities right now. Noaa's aquaculture opportunity areas are a situation where a large resource-rich agency is able to go in, do a lot of these analyses that Diane was talking about on behalf of applicants who might not have the resources to do that on their own. We're also seeing port districts taking this kind of strategy where they go in, do a lot of the preliminary permitting and analyses on behalf of tenants who they might sublease to or issue permits to on their behalf, because they have that economic development drive or need, right? And Alta Sea is one of those, right? So that creates an encouraging atmosphere where it's not just the deep pockets that make it through, but there is an avenue for others to follow in the wake as well.
That's great, because again, it's real estate. I mean, for lack of a term, and it's public real estate. So it's public property. And how do you, as you said, how do you allocate it? And is it just for those that have that big investment behind them, or is it, this? I was going to ask that question about the opportunity areas. We're familiar with on land opportunity zones and enterprise zones and different things that they do. A little bit different, but as you've just described it, I think it is areas where some of that expertise and knowledge and understanding is already taken into consideration. And so in essence, you are looking at people who can come take advantage in a good way of those opportunities to create that commercial side of it. And so I would, ask as I go to you, David, and I'm going to ask any of the attendees, because we have just about 15 more minutes. And so I think we're going to spend the last 10, hopefully with questions. I have more questions, but we want to make sure we have it of the group individuals who are participating. But from your perspective, David, as been described, what they're looking to the future, how does that bode for you as the private sector of investments? And again, you walked into, although, something that had already been started, but that takes understanding and patience, I think, probably, as we look at the future. What do you see kind of lessons learned, opportunities, risks going forward? And does it sound appealing, as they've talked about with these aquaculture opportunities kind of areas? Absolutely,
because when we talk about open ocean aquaculture, we kind of look at it as a new frontier, and new frontiers have massive potential, and then they also have massive challenges as well. On the, I sound like I'm sending a lot of mottos across, but part of our company motto is doing well by doing good, and I think aquaculture, open ocean aquaculture, offers both. In terms of doing good, being able to provide sustainable supply of healthy protein for the future, pretty big. Addressing population growth and food security concerns, check. Combating climate change, catalyzing a domestic seafood trade, stimulating working waterfronts, where possible. Those are all things that this opens up for the future. So, big positivity. From the investor standpoint, aquaculture is the fastest growing animal food production sector. You know, predictions of over 500% rise in global production, 1990 to I think it was 2018. Projected to increase 30% by 2030, predicted $280+ billion market by 2027. We tend to talk more purpose over profit, but with aquaculture and that new frontier, you've got all of those opportunities working, and especially as we're working potentially with the second largest EEZ in the world, where we have kind of untapped, it's not land, it's kind of untapped ocean that, if addressed properly, opens up immense opportunity. So you know, you want to approach that in the right way, and for investors who are looking to do that, who embrace the regulatory process, you know, take on some of the challenges, which I don't know if we'll have time to talk about, but you know, take on the challenge, have the patience, look at it long term for the future as well. Quick investment in and out, make your money and go. I don't think that's where aquaculture is for sure. It's an investment and a commitment, and that comes with a mission. So yes, massive opportunity. Comes with the challenges. So we have a regulatory process which is developing right now. You know, we feel we're part of that developing process. So people who come aboard with that kind of thought that they can do well by doing good, I think the opportunity is absolutely there.
Yeah, that's great. And I think in anything that's it's not in the beginning, but as we're looking towards this, I mean, there's always those challenges as the new frontier you're looking at. Are there, and I ask this of all of you, are there certain species or methods of production that are preferable for California that, you know, you're encouraging, or the politicians are saying, this is, we really want this is what we'd like to see you do if we had to pick, you know, here's the direction we're trying to go in. And then my second question would be, you know, as you look at the huge ocean on the Pacific side, and where, you know, are there maps? Again, we have the ports of, you know, we have San Diego, and we have military down there, as you mentioned, Diane. We have the ports of LA and Long Beach. We have the harbor up in San Francisco, and you know, there's a lot of areas that were probably off limits, so to speak. But I'm just curious. So my questions are, and we'll do a little bit of a lightning round on this. You know, are there specific species? Or is there a map to kind of tell you where it will or will not, you know, work? And then the last part, is there anywhere else in the country or in the world that is doing what we're doing here in California? So I'm going to go to you, Diane, first.
Okay, thank you. Species wise, we're encouraging, we at Noaa are encouraging native species or established aquaculture species. For example, there are some shellfish species that are not native per se, but they've been cultured in California for over 100 years. And Randy can probably get into more detail about that, but we see those as naturalized species, and they're common species for aquaculture. They're registered with the state as approved species to cultivate. For fish species, we are definitely looking at native species. You know, that gives you a supply of fish to choose from to be able to use in a breeding program to cultivate those fish. And so I would say that the only caveat is just that what you might term naturalized non-native species that have been cultured for, you know, over 100 years or more. The Mediterranean mussel, our different oyster species. I think there is also a lot of interest in furthering some of the native shellfish species. There's a shellfish restoration working group that is working closely with industry on propagation techniques, because they've struggled to restore native oyster species. and they've learned a lot from the commercial industry in terms of propagation techniques, and they're interested in seeing if the native oyster species could in fact be developed into a commercial industry at some point in time. So there's a ton of potential for variances. Regarding maps and such, I can put into the chat the document that we created for the aquaculture opportunity areas exercise. So Noaa was directed through an executive order from the administration to develop aquaculture opportunity areas. And the executive order calls for 10 aquaculture opportunity areas over a several year period, using an approach that you would start with 2 and then sort of have a gradual, adding on 2 more over time till you reach a total of 10. The executive order directs us to identify geographic areas to consider for aquaculture opportunity areas and then develop an environmental impact statement under the NEPA process to evaluate those areas in each of the regions. So Southern California and the Gulf of Mexico were the first 2 geographic areas that were identified to pursue development of aquaculture opportunity areas. And the first step in that process was to conduct a robust and exhaustive spatial analysis of the ocean space off of Southern California. So the entire Southern California bight was evaluated. That link that I put in the chat is the atlas that resulted from that process. So
Okay.
that's chock full of maps.
Information.
The parameters of what we looked at were per what the executive order required, that there was a desire for the AOAs to be 500 to 2,000 acres in size in order to support multiple farms. That's the whole goal of the AOA process, is to enable more than one farm in a geographic area. And so the document that I list there gives us that sort of universe of where the highest potential is with the least amount of conflict. So highest potential from an industry perspective in terms of distance from port, depth, temperature, those kinds of considerations. And then looking at all of the other users in that space, including biological resources. And what sort of floats to the top is a lot less than you might think. And so, and this is all focused in federal waters. So now we've started the NEPA process. We published a notice of intent to prepare the programmatic EIS in May, and we're in the NEPA scoping period right now, which is when we accept public comment. And so we were looking for public comment in terms of, is there additional data we should be considering that wasn't evaluated in the atlas, as well as what we should analyze in the programmatic EIS. And I can also throw that link into the chat.
And anything that, yeah, that, and I know that the host and others can share this with people, those documents that may be able to be on that as well. Because I'm not sure if everyone who's on the webinar can see the note that you sent if it goes to vote.
Okay.
But appreciate it. And Randy, I'm gonna, Diane gave a lot of good information on a couple of things, but I would ask if you have anything to add on that. And similarly, are there any other models that you look at as a state that you, kind of coordinate with anyone on, the rest of in the country?
There are definitely examples that we can learn from in other parts of the country. I think that California prides itself on being a leader in many respects, and I think it strives to be innovative in that respect. My impression or my opinion here, and I'm not speaking on behalf of the state, but there are a lot of different species, methods, and operations that can be successful or disastrous. It really depends on how things are planned, designed, how they're managed. And this goes for farm installations. It goes for marketing strategies. It goes for regulatory policy. So we have kind of a tall order ahead of us on trying to figure things out. I mean, when we talk about species preferences, the state has been overseeing shellfish aquaculture, like I say, for a very, very long time. It's familiar turf to us. So getting some of the ground rules more consolidated, giving guidance and a more connected policy in our action plan is really focused on seaweed and shellfish to start with, because there's some familiarity with that practice. When it comes to finfish, I think that there's, first of all, we have legislative constraints on what is allowed from the get-go. We can't even consider net pen salmonid culture in the waters of the Pacific, or exotics or transgenics. Not that any of those three categories are the big push, but it has established boundaries on what may be considered. And I think that it will take us some time, and thankfully Noaa is covering some of this ground in their NEPA analysis, their work with Pacific Ocean aquafarms. So we will learn more and lay a foundation of experience that we can draw from as the state develops further policy that way. I don't mean to drag this out, but on the subject of maps and where you can do it, I think it's a little misleading to look at the coast of California and how big it is and think, look at all of this potential. You really have to be realistic about how strong the ocean energy is north of Point Conception. You have to be realistic about where the port facilities are and the need to service a farm within a reasonable distance of steaming out from a port. So the options to choose sites really narrow down quite quickly when you think about it in that.
Absolutely. That's what I'm saying. You know, when you look at all of those restrictions and things, it's going to be a little smaller than you thought. So David, I'm going to give you the last word because we are almost at end of time. And from a perspective, David, of where you think we're going, and again, whether or not there are some certain species that you've looked at, but generally as someone that's looking, forward, what advice would you give to someone who's listening today, in a quick fashion as to the next steps forward?
Do your research. I mean, just following quickly on from what Diane and Randy said, yes, choice of species is very important. We, on the mussel farm side, looked at blue Mediterranean mussels because it's been farmed here successfully. I agree with Randy in terms of seaweed and shellfish. Those are kind of the most commonly accepted approaches to farming here. We are looking from the finfish side at the major species, California yellowtail, Sirenia dorsalis. But I think there are more conceptual challenges to finfish because historically abroad and unfortunately some domestically, there's examples of how poorly run farms can have their interactions and challenges. I think the thing is, we are looking forward. Where are we going to be in 2050 when we really need, new forms of sustainable food, and what will actually move the needle so we can supply it for national security, and we're thinking for our kids and our, future generations. And if we can't learn to farm the sea, we might be in trouble. And obviously finfish is one of those things. So I think the science, the technology, the sighting technology, the engineering, the best practices have come on a long way. So I think there's reasons to be less fearful, but it has to be done right. In terms of people moving forward, I think consider your mission. What are you doing this for? Like I say, there's a lot of considerations. Embrace the regulatory process. Work with experts. Have patience, and understand there's unforeseen challenges, because this is when we have the benefits and opportunities of the new frontier. That also, we have the challenges of a new frontier, and some of those are not foreseen. And we're all learning this process as we go ahead. So if you go in and embrace that, there's a very exciting future in aquaculture in California.
That was a great ending. I don't know how much I can add on that. And to our speakers, I want to say thank you so very much, because I think those that participate in the webinar learned a lot about that there is a process, that it is patience, that it is the new frontier, but that we're not just starting from scratch, that it's been in process for a long time, and that this is a pivotal point in the time of being able to do aquaculture and seaweed and the sea, and that go in with your eyes open. And so hopefully that we added to that. And I just want to thank you and the obviously the sponsors who made this possible, for taking the time, and our participants who were here with us today. An hour goes by just like that on this, but I know I learned a lot, and I appreciate all of your time. And thank you so much to being able to, be part of it. So thank you all, and all to see. Thanks so much for leading on this.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. My
Thank
pleasure.
you. Good to see you all.
Thank you.
Bye.